In Honeycomb Way, life threw us into a storm we never saw coming. I was diagnosed with stage 5 ovarian cancer, the kind of diagnosis that doesn't just threaten your health, but your future. Surgery, chemotherapy, radiation. Into a storm we never saw coming. I was diagnosed with stage 3 ovarian cancer, the kind of diagnosis that doesn't just threaten your health, but your future. Surgery, chemotherapy, radiation, and even a stem cell transplant became urgent priorities. In the middle of it all, the doctors gently broke the news. My fertility was at risk. There was no time to freeze my eggs. In a matter of days, everything I thought I knew about my body and my future changed. I tried to hold on to hope, but hope looked different now. It wasn't about planning for a family next year or the year after. It was about surviving. We knew that if we wanted children, the path would be hard, uncertain, and likely require the help of science, grace, and a whole lot of courage. Years later, when we were finally ready to try, the words IVF and donor became part of our everyday vocabulary. It wasn't how we pictured it, but love has a way of redefining everything, even motherhood. What started as a diagnosis of loss slowly transformed into a new kind of beginning, one filled with needles, doctor visits, and prayers whispered in the dark. We didn't know it yet, but this chapter, as painful as it was, would be the start of something extraordinary. After cancer, we knew that getting pregnant wouldn't be easy, but we also knew this: we weren't ready to let go of the dream of becoming parents. The IVF process was overwhelming, both physically and emotionally. There were countless injections. I remember lining up the needles every day, breathing deep and whispering to myself, "This is for our baby." Hormones took over my body, but I didn't care. I kept going. We waited, prayed, hoped, and then one day, we got the call. The pregnancy test was positive. I could barely believe it. I said it every single morning. I can't believe this is happening. There's a baby inside me. After everything we'd been through, the cancer, the fear, the uncertainty, this was our miracle. But early on, we learned that things were far from simple. Our baby was measuring below the first percentile, smaller than anyone expected for her gestational age. The goal became clear. If we could just make it to 28 weeks, she might have a chance. I carried that hope like it was oxygen. I followed every instruction, every meal, every rest. I tried not to think about the risks. But then one morning, I was sitting at the kitchen table, eating a sandwich, and I felt blood. Everything happened so fast. Within the hour, we were told I had HELLP syndrome and preeclampsia, and our baby had to be delivered immediately. We were terrified, but we held on to faith. The same faith that had carried us through every storm before. The delivery room was quiet. Not the kind of silence that comforts, but the kind that holds its breath. I remember lying there, heart pounding, praying that our baby would make it out alive. At 23 weeks gestation, our daughter, Jo, entered the world weighing only 11 ounces, 340 grams, smaller than most people's hands. The moment she was born, she let out a sound. Not quite a cry, but a breath, a whisper of life. That sound meant she was fighting. Dr. Daly briefly held her up, and I remember the shock of seeing just how tiny she was. In the photo, her entire body fit in the palm of a hand. Her skin was nearly transparent, her eyelids still sealed, and her arms no bigger than a finger. Dr. Everett brought her over to me, but honestly, I could barely see her. I kept asking, "Where is she?" I was looking for our baby, but all I saw were wires, machines, and a fragile flicker of life. The doctors had warned us before her birth, babies this early and this small, especially with intrauterine growth restriction, rarely survive. The risk of brain bleeds, organ failure, and respiratory complications was dangerously high. But Jo had something we didn't expect: a quiet, stubborn strength. She was placed in the NICU, surrounded by machines that kept her alive. We weren't allowed to hold her right away. All we could do was stand there, hearts wide open, whispering hope into the air. We had no idea what the next few days would hold. But Jo was here. She had made it. And we were already in awe of her. 9 days. That's how long we waited to hold our daughter for the very first time. In those 9 days, Jo fought harder than most people do in a lifetime. She battled to breathe, to stay alive, to grow, surrounded by wires, tubes, and the constant hum of NICU machines. When the moment finally came, Dr. Everett gently told us we needed to come in. Jo wasn't doing well. Her oxygen levels were dropping. She was desatting and unstable. It might be time to hold her. Not just for comfort, but because they didn't know if she would make it. I was terrified. I didn't want our first skin-to-skin to also be our last. But I knew I needed to be there for her, to let her feel that she wasn't alone. When they placed Joe on my chest, it didn't even feel like I was holding anything. She was so small, so light, so fragile. Her entire body barely covered my heartbeat. I don't remember what I said. Maybe I told her how much I loved her. Maybe I whispered, "Please stay." Maybe I just cried. In that moment, everything else faded away. The machines, the fear, the unknown. It was just me and my daughter, soul to soul. Holding Joe for the first time didn't just change how I felt as a mother. It changed how I saw life. Every second mattered. Every breath she took was a miracle. That tiny girl resting against my heart taught me what real strength looks like. And I knew then, no matter what happened next, she would never fight alone. Everyone told us the NICU would be a roller coaster, and they were right. Some days, Joe would show small signs of progress. Her oxygen needs would improve, her color would brighten, and we'd start to believe we were turning a corner. But then, out of nowhere, she'd crash. One day she was stable, the next she had pneumonia. It was like constantly living on a cliff edge, never knowing when the ground might give out beneath us. The hardest part? We were completely powerless. There was nothing we could do except pray, hope, and trust the medical team. I had always pictured myself as the strong one, the one who would hold everything together. But during those dark nights in the NICU, I broke down more times than I can count. And when I couldn't hold it together, he did. We took turns crying, breaking, encouraging, and picking each other back up. We learned to celebrate the smallest victories, a gram of weight gain, a successful feeding, quieter night. Those things became everything. Watching Joe fight with every cell in her body changed how we saw life. She wasn't even supposed to make it, and yet here she was, pushing forward inch by inch. The NICU didn't just test our strength. It showed us how much love can carry you when science meets soul. It was humbling, exhausting, brutal. But through it all, one thing stayed the same. We never gave up on her, because she never gave up on herself. As Joe's journey continued, we realized we weren't just living a story. We were living a message. A message for parents who were scared, for families who had lost hope, for anyone who'd ever looked at a fragile, tiny life and wondered, will they make it? Joe wasn't just a preemie. She was a living, breathing symbol of what's possible, even when everything says it isn't. We read every baby book, watched every parenting video, but nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared us for this. For the alarms in the NICU, for the stillness of fear, for the silent prayers whispered beside an isolette. This wasn't the path we expected to walk, but it was ours now. And we weren't walking alone. It took a village to keep Joe alive. Doctors, nurses, respiratory therapists, they weren't just medical staff. They were angels in scrubs. They were the steady voices when our fear got too loud. They were the ones who told us, she's strong, let's keep going. Joe came home on oxygen. And while that might seem overwhelming to some, for us, it was nothing short of a miracle. After all she'd been through, oxygen was just one more tool to help her breathe a little easier. It didn't define her. Her spirit did. Joe's life reminded us, miracles aren't always loud. Sometimes they come in 11 ounces of hope, wrapped in medical tape and prayers. Her story became more than survival. It became a reason for others to keep believing, even in their darkest hour. The day we brought Joe home didn't look like anything we'd imagined, but it felt better than we ever dreamed. There were no balloons, no grand welcome party, just a quiet car ride, a portable oxygen tank, and a deep breath that finally felt real. After months of sterile white walls, beeping monitors, and the constant shadow of what if, we were finally taking our daughter home. Bringing Joe home felt like crossing the finish line of a marathon we never trained for. It was surreal. We kept glancing at her in the car seat, still not quite believing it. That she was stable, that she was alive, that she was ours. So the oxygen monitor was easier to bear knowing we were finally under the same roof. What stood out the most was what we brought home besides Joe, a deep sense of gratitude. We weren't just parents. We were students of survival, of grace, and of the human spirit. And our teachers? The nurses and doctors who not only cared for Joe's tiny body, but also held our hearts through the hardest months of our lives. They weren't just professionals. They were therapists, guides, and sometimes just a shoulder to cry on. Their compassion gave us strength when we were running on empty. Joe's homecoming wasn't the end of the journey. It was the beginning of a new chapter. One filled with healing, adjustment, and above all, hope. Because finally we were home. Behind every miracle is a team, and Joe's survival was no exception. The NICU wasn't just filled with machines and monitors. It was filled with humans who cared deeply. The nurses weren't just doing their job, they were pouring love into every detail. From the way they adjusted Joe's blankets to how they held our hands when words failed. They became our teachers, showing us how to care for a fragile preemie, how to read her cues, how to feed, burp, and comfort her in ways that kept her safe. But they were also our therapists, listening when we broke down, offering a calm presence in the chaos. And the doctors, they were more than experts. They were partners in this journey. Every morning they gathered to talk about Joe's progress. Every decision was made with care, with collaboration. We never felt alone. There were days we couldn't think clearly. Days when fear clouded everything. On those days, it was their voices that grounded us. We've seen babies like Joe pull through. Let's take it one day at a time. Looking back, we know this. Joe survived because she was strong, but she also survived because she was surrounded by a team of angels who refused to give up on her. And in doing so, they didn't just save our daughter, they saved us too. Today, Joe is home, growing, breathing on her own, and thriving in ways we once only dreamed of. Her journey is something we'll tell her again and again as she grows up. Not to make her feel different, but to help her understand how extraordinary her beginning was. That she didn't just arrive, she fought for every breath, every heartbeat, and that she was never alone. One day, she'll hear about the odds she beat, how she was born at 23 weeks, weighing just 340 grams, how she fit in the palm of a hand, how doctors weren't sure she'd make it through the night, and yet, here she is. We'll tell her about the people who loved her before she even knew the world. The nurses who whispered encouragement when she was too weak to cry, the doctors who called her miracle, and the parents who prayed every hour for another day. And most importantly, we'll tell her about the faith that carried us. About how, even in the darkest nights, we believed God had a plan for her life. One bigger than anything we could imagine. Joe's story is one of survival, of hope, of love that refused to give up. It's a story we'll never stop telling, because it reminds us, and the world, that with faith and fight, even the tiniest lives can leave the biggest impact.